The Mitsubishi G4M1 Model 11. Betty bought range by selling away survival. It became the most widely built Japanese bomber of the war, and in its first year, it hit hard enough to help devastate Clark Field and take part in sinking HMS Prince of Wales and HMS Repulse. The price sat in the airframe. No armor and no self-sealing fuel tanks. That trade worked against weak fighter opposition and fell apart once Allied interception improved. The design could reach far. It could not take punishment. Even the bomber that carried Admiral Yamamoto to his death shows the same problem in one frame. Reach was there. Protection was not. The Nakajima B7M2 Tenzan looked like the replacement Japan actually needed, then arrived in a fleet that was already losing the ability to use it. The 1939 requirement called for a 3-seat carrier torpedo bomber capable of 464 kilometers per hour, about 288 miles per hour, and the B6N eventually became the standard carrier torpedo bomber of Japan's final war years. That sounds like a solution. Its carrier combat debut came in the Philippine Sea, in an environment where United States naval air superiority was already overwhelming. The airplane was newer than the B-5N Kate it replaced. The carrier force and the pilot base around it were already breaking down. The Mitsubishi J7W1 Raiden was Japan's dedicated interceptor answer, and even that answer took too long to settle down. The first of 3 prototypes flew in March 1942, and the design immediately ran into landing gear issues plus engine and propeller problems serious enough to force repeated modifications. The switch to the Kase-23 engine and other fixes kept the project alive, but they also cost time Japan did not have. That is what makes the Raiden frustrating. The route itself made sense. Japan needed a harder climbing interceptor more than another turning fighter. By the time the J7W1 was ready in useful form, the pressure on the home islands was already outrunning production. The Kawasaki Ki-84 Hien tried to give Japan a sturdier, more modern fighter and ended up proving how hard that route was to sustain. It was the only mass-produced Japanese fighter of the war with a liquid-cooled engine, and pilots liked its armor, self-sealing tanks, and stronger construction. It first saw combat over Yokohama during the Doolittle Raid in April 1942. Then, the environment started working against it. In New Guinea, the fuel pump suffered in tropical heat, the Ha-40 engine became a chronic problem, and in-theater overhauls were effectively impossible. The Hien could fight. The system behind it could not support it cleanly enough for long. The Nakajima Ki-84 Hayate is one of the clearest cases where a strong airplane still ended up inside a failed war. It was fast enough to matter with a top speed of 680 kilometers per hour, and one Smithsonian summary still describes the Ki-84 as a superlative fighter that was a match for any Allied fighter. That is exactly why its fate cuts harder. The Hayate entered production in August 1944, when Japan no longer had the fuel, training depth, or overall control of the war needed to cash in that performance. By the final stage, Ki-84s were even turning up in special attack service. Japan had finally produced a fighter that could stand in the room. The system around it was already collapsing. The Aichi M6A1 Seiran was built for a mission so ambitious that the mission itself failed before the airplane could matter. It was designed to operate exclusively from submarines, specifically the giant I-400 class boats that could each carry 3 Seirans in a watertight hangar. A total of 28 were built, and they were intended for long-range surprise strikes, including a late war plan aimed at San Diego using 15 aircraft. The airplane is memorable because the concept was memorable. That is also why it failed. Once Japan reached the point of relying on submarine aircraft carriers for strategic attack, the gap between imagination and wartime reality had already become too wide to close. The Aichi B7A2 Ryusei matured into one of Japan's best carrier attack aircraft just as the carrier war was slipping out from under it. The B7A2 was the largest and heaviest Japanese carrier-based attack aircraft to fly in World War II, and it flew and handled well enough that it should have mattered far more than it did. It did not. Smithsonian's summary states plainly that the type never played a significant role in the Japanese war effort. The surrounding facts explain why. Shinano was designed to embark 18 B-7A Ryusei aircraft and was sunk before that future meant anything. The airplane was ready late. The platform system it needed was already dying. The Mitsubishi A7M2 Reppu was the Zero's real successor, and it arrived too late to become more than proof that Japan still knew what it needed. Work on the Zero replacement began in 1940, but the design effort dragged on too long and missed the chance to enter production in time. A museum history of the Zero notes that Horikoshi began the A7M replacement project in 1940 and did not succeed until it was too late to put the aircraft into production. The same late-war naval planning that imagined Shinano carrying 18 Reppu fighters shows how seriously Japan viewed it. That future never arrived. The Reppu was not the old answer. It was the new answer arriving after the war had already moved past rescue. The Nakajima Ki-115A Tsurugi was not designed to win air superiority, survive repeated missions, or even come home. It was designed for one-way attacks, and that alone puts it in a different category of failure. The aircraft could fly 1,200 kilometers non-stop, and Nakajima built 104 of them, while another firm built one more. None saw combat before the war ended. Those numbers matter because they show how far Japan had moved from trying to field a better fighter or bomber. The Tsurugi was a stripped-down answer to national exhaustion. Once a military starts mass-producing aircraft for deliberate one-way use, the argument is no longer about winning with better airplanes. The Kyushu J7W1 Shinden looked like tomorrow and still belonged to a war that was already over. It was the only World War II canard aircraft that any combatant ordered into production. Work began in June 1944, and the first of 2 prototypes was finished 10 months later. A second prototype was built, and 18 more were under construction, but none of that changed the timing. The Shinden is famous because the layout was radical, and the purpose was clear: high-speed interception of Allied bombers. The deeper story is more brutal. Japan still had new ideas in 1945. It no longer had the time, industrial stability, or operational space to turn them into outcomes. Japan kept producing answers that looked better and better, but most arrived after the carriers, fuel, pilots, and time were already gone. On the American side, failure often dies in replacement, scale, and a system that moves faster than the airplane. So click the next video and keep watching.